at the
Okay.
top of
Live streaming is on.
Can someone
is there
confirm you heard me?
something there's
Yes.
does it
Okay,
say you're
great.
live streaming?
Have fun.
Okay, so yeah, I'm the first speaker. You can tell me when you're ready and I can start. And you can see me and hear me all right?
Yes,
Okay.
can see. So you can start when you are ready.
Okay. You said that you could let it go, and I wouldn't catch you hung up on somebody that you used to know. You didn't have to cut me out. Have your friends collect your records and then change your number. I guess that I don't need that though. Now you're just somebody that I used to know. The #1 hit song in more than 23 countries, including the US, UK, Australia, Canada, and France. The winner of 14 ARIA awards and 3 Grammys. I'm talking about the abandoned man behind the 2011 global hit titled Somebody That I Used to Know, Gautier. Have any of you heard of him? I mean, he's so forgotten that when I asked my 11-year-old cousin, Dia, do you remember of any of Gautier's songs? She said, of course. Goat goes bah! But really, it's quite sad. The dude smashes all the records and then just vanishes into thin air and becomes, well, somebody that we used to know. I guess we moved on from the most iconic song of the decade a little too quickly. But this idea of moving on too quickly pertains far beyond pop culture. Becoming more popular nowadays is this move on culture. And we seem to just move on from things left and right. You broke up with your girlfriend? Chill, just find a new one. Got a bad grade on a test? Don't worry about it. Just do better on the next one. Me too? Move on. School shootings? Move on. Black Lives Matter? Move on. Now we just have a bunch of problems that we don't have solutions to. This move on culture has hypnotized us into believing that we're solving our problems when in reality, we're just ignoring them. So, today, let's see how this move on culture is deeply integrated into our society. Then we'll explore its detrimental impacts before finally not moving on and coming up with some solutions. You know what Ariana Grande's most iconic song is? Thank you, next. Thank you, next. Thank you, next. I'm so grateful for my ex. The way Ariana describes relationships seems like she's a toll collector, collecting dimes from passengers. Like, thank you, next car, please. But the unfortunate reality is that what Ariana describes in her song seems to be modeling what's going on in our real life today. Becoming more prevalent is the idea of a move-on relationship. Now, simply getting into a new relationship in order to move from a past one. In other words, playing with someone's emotions. Although this may seem effective in hindsight, in reality, it's just avoiding the issue. Psychotherapist Carlos Carmona Goyena states, moving on from one relationship to the next without learning from the past one does not help one be successful. Instead, it just exacerbates the problem. But this move on culture extends far beyond breakups and love. Following the 9/11 terrorist attacks, when a surge of Islamophobia haunted American citizens, we protested fiercely against the discrimination, saw a surge of organizations rise up to spread awareness, and the United States Department of Justice engaged in extensive outreach efforts to discourage violence against Muslims. But now, we barely hear anything about it anymore. It's barely on the news and we don't talk about it. The sentiment has gone away, but in reality, that hasn't lessened the issue. According to the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, the fear of and discrimination against Muslims is on the rise in the United States and is ranked as currently having the second most number of hate groups centered against them, only second to personal hate crimes. According to this research, 75% of our Muslim population still lives in fear of being targeted and discriminated against. But I guess our concern for our Muslim brothers and sisters ended after 9/11. We just simply moved on. Not just Islamophobia, but one of the greatest American tragedies of all time, gun violence. After Sandy Hook in Orlando, we protested and waged an entire war to ban guns, but with new issues coming our way, we let ourselves be silenced by the ominous politics, and now have moved on. Yet, 500 people still die every day due to guns. Newspaper columnist Dan Hodges tweeted, "In retrospect, Sandy Hook marked the end of the gun control debate. When America decided that killing children was bearable, it was over. The millions that have lost their lives to gunshots and wounds have died in vain because we have moved on." So, you may think, what can a bunch of high school kids do to stop Islamophobia and gun violence anyway? Isn't the issue too large scale? But if you had the chance to, would you? Think about it. Do we make an effect and change things that are within our control? After all, we are the same people that read a depressing article on how California is suffering from a major drought, and then seconds later, take a 30-minute shower. We are the same people that read a nerve-wracking article on how populations of marine life are dying due to littering, and the second later, refuse to pick up the plastic bottle that is in front of us because it isn't ours. Personally, I've become a victim to this move-on culture as well. In 2011, my aunt and my cousin got into a major road accident, with my aunt being declared dead on the spot. One of the most worst and traumatic moments of my life. My cousin, whom I had so many childhood memories with, suffered from traumatic brain injury, lost his speech temporarily, and became partially paralyzed. I couldn't watch my entire family crumble in front of me, so when I turned to my friends for help, they gave me a simple piece of advice. Move on. Do something you love. Talk with your friends. Start singing and composing music. Go on more frequent jogs. Just distance yourself. And guess what? That's exactly what I did. I distanced myself and I had successfully moved on. But in that process, I had become a terrible niece to my uncle. I had become a terrible sister to my cousin. I had become a terrible human being who wasn't there when my family needed me the most. You can only avoid something for so long. If you decide to participate in this move-on culture, it will get back to you, but harder. Now I'm grieving the incident like I should have done years back, but with something else combined. Guilt. Guilt for not being there. So, as complicated as this issue may sound, the solution is actually quite simple. Just stop moving on. Instead of moving on, grow on. Use that painful memory to elevate yourself and change. Don't remember it as pain. And for the societal prejudices that plague our society, just take action. Yesterday, 150 Americans died due to gun violence. So today, go on social media, organize a location, and start a protest. Within a few weeks, who knows, the protest could spread to cities, school districts, and states, and you might be the reason behind the next national surge of gun violence protests. And this time, the government may ban guns. You will be the reason. Stop moving on. Fight back and take action. So, guess what? By talking about Gautier, at least a few of you in this room remember him, the winner of 14 ARIA awards and 3 Grammys, and his iconic song titled Somebody That I Used to Know. So, Gautier, here's my song for you. We never really cut you out. We were just the victims of this move on culture. We've always really loved you though. You'll always be somebody that we've always known. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have the second speaker? Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the second speaker is not there. So should we go to the next?
Yeah, we can go to the next then. Third one.
Okay.
One second. Let me see what is your topic.
Riksha, I think it's a
Yeah.
background sound that I can hear.
What?
I hear some background noise. I think it's
It could be the road noise.
okay. So you have the windows closed. Do you want?
Yeah, the windows are closed. I actually live right next to the expressway, so.
That's fine. Yeah. Whenever you're ready, Priksha.
Can everyone see and hear me okay?
Yes. Good.
It was quick. A matter of seconds. One small step. Straight into dog poop. Oh my gosh, that didn't happen. I tried not to think about it. I literally pretended that it didn't happen. But at the end of the day, or rather within the next 5 minutes, I knew I was going to have to wash it. But I just couldn't get over the fact, did I really try to ignore stepping in dog poop when I could have just as easily dealt with it? And just like that, too often we ignore matters in an attempt to shield ourselves from reality. Whether that be ignoring our homework assignment, or somebody's flaws, or even something as big a problem as racism. As much as we want it to be, ignorance isn't bliss. So today, let's step into the causes of our ignorance, then dwell on its effects, while finally washing our feet and finding our solutions. One of the main causes of our ignorance is personal bias. According to the Society of Human Research Management, it might seem natural to relate more to the job applicant from your hometown, or someone who likes the same music as you do. But it would be irresponsible to extend an offer of employment to that candidate based on these positive or favorable biases. And while many agree on this, the Society explains how it can be hard to determine our own personal bias. But that doesn't mean we can ignore their other characteristics just because we're biased towards them. because inevitably they won't succeed at their job, therefore giving them an unfair advantage in comparison to better qualified candidates. Another cause of our ignorance is within our own emotions. In an attempt to please others, we hide our emotions. According to Time magazine, people tend to avoid painful or conflicting emotions in their lives, just as most of us do. But in order to heal the mind, we need to experience the emotions that go with our stories. When we are taught about the automatic nature of our emotions and learn to identify and work with the core emotions beneath our anxiety, we feel and function better. If we suppress our other emotions, our optimism forces us to be blindsided to the issues in front of us and adds to our ignorance of a harmful situation. The effects of our ignorance can be detrimental. Our personal bias can lead to us ignoring others' abusive characteristics and can potentially put us in danger. The parts of them that we were biased towards may only be a small percent of them, and we can't make our decisions based on only that. And in a workplace where everyone acts the same and has the same experiences, the company can miss out on consumers who do not relate. The target audience is shrunk, and people who need certain things may not have access to them. This changes the way we communicate with the world. According to nonprofitrisk.org, as we try to determine meaning in the world around us, we subconsciously give weight to information that confirms our existing perceptions, and we discount information that would force us to reevaluate these perceptions. This confirmation bias can lead to us having a totally different viewpoint than other people, further splitting people with different values. This causes a lack of communication, which can be harmful to relationships. According to a study by the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers, 67.5% of divorces are due to a lack of communication. The study showed that people felt ignored by their partners and disconnected. The study showed that people felt like their emotions were invalid because the other had a tendency to dislike talking about their own emotions. This led to the cycle continuing, people ignoring one another, and eventually divorce. Their ignorance of their own emotions ended up negatively impacting themselves and their relationships permanently. In addition to this, when we hide our emotions, we shut others out. When we hide our emotions, this can leave physical stress on our body. According to clinical provisional psychologist Victoria Terrett, suppressing your emotions, whether it's anger, sadness, grief, or frustration, can lead to physical stress on the body. The effect is the same, even if the core emotion differs. The physical stress she described can be an increased risk of diabetes and heart disease, and problems with memory, aggression, anxiety, and depression. When we shut others out, we ignore our emotions, and we are disconnected from everyone. And I remember back in 8th grade, when school was completely online, I would wait until the end of the week to turn in assignments. I ignored what I knew had to be done. And I bottled up my emotions, and I still struggle with showing them sometimes. And I hated it. My friends didn't understand how all of a sudden I wasn't their always perky, never sad friend anymore. The online school actually felt convenient. I could make sarcastic comments about my fellow students and they wouldn't even know. I could have breakdowns and all I had to do was turn off my camera. That would surely count as not ignoring, right? Unfortunately, no. Not ignoring means letting other people see the true you. They can see your emotions and it would allow them to empathize. True connection would allow people to become friends. Mute button can hold the power of who you trust, but ideally, you want to express yourself to everyone and show your true emotions to those you trust. While it may seem hard to not have ignorance, there are solutions. One solution is to eliminate personal bias. According to the American Academy of Family Physicians, they recommend slowing down to think about whether your words are biased before speaking and reflecting on previous decisions to see if a pattern emerges. Once we find our biases, we can be mindful, practicing self care and empathy, and we can explain ourselves to others so that everyone is healthy lifestyles. Everyone has healthier lifestyles and connection with each other. Another solution is to effectively communicate. According to relevate.org, communication is actually quite simple. In fact, thinking before speaking is a major part of that as well. To effectively communicate, we need to make sure that what we say is actually what we mean. Our words have different connotations, they mean different things in different scenarios. So when we take time and explain ourselves so that people don't misunderstand our words, we can actually communicate effectively. Once we do this, we can communicate and connect with others so that everybody understands everyone. So next time you see that friend, the one you don't quite understand, talk with them. Communicate effectively so that they understand you and you understand them. Our ignorance cannot be ignored. It affects us every single day, changing our relationships and ultimately our entire lives. So when we learn how our bias and our emotions can reflect ignorance in our everyday lives, and we learn how to communicate effectively and show our emotions instead of suppressing them like we are taught, we enable ourselves to solve some of the world's greatest problems, from protecting our mental health to dealing with dog poop. And if stepping in my dog's poop has taught me anything, it's that ignorance isn't bliss. Thank you.
Thank you. We have the second speaker, or we can proceed with the fourth. Ashwin. Ashwin.
Yep, I'm here. All right. Can you see and hear me well?
Yes.
Perfect. The title of my speech is in the chat, and I am ready whenever you are.
I'm ready on my side. Let's wait for other judge signal, please.
I'm ready too.
Okay.
Perfect. In July of 2016, a massive revolution shocked the world. A revolution so deadly that it claimed millions of lives worldwide. A revolution so monumental that it still persists today. This revolution was Pokemon Go. I mean, seriously, 500 million people download this game to swipe up at their screens to try to catch alien-looking creatures that inhabit our planet for no particular reason. But in all seriousness, this global phenomenon brought people together from all across the world into a single community. Or so you thought, because these people aren't actually talking to each other when they're right next to each other. They're staring at their phones the whole time. So much for community. But that feeling of community goes far beyond a game on our phones. We all have an inherent desire to feel a sense of belonging and community. But today, we've replaced deep, genuine relationships with profile pictures on our phone screens. Dr. Alex Lickerman of Psychology Today writes that we feel we're connecting effectively with others via the internet, but too much. And we find ourselves in a sense of social isolation. And whether it's erasing our cultural identities to assimilate into America, or someone joining a hate group just to feel like they're part of a group, I'm afraid people have begun searching a sense of belonging in increasingly desperate and dangerous ways. So today, like any good video game, let's first introduce our main character, as we understand why we need to belong. Next, we'll jump to the climactic cutscenes as we discuss the harms of doing so. And finally, we'll finish the final boss as we figure out a solution to belonging. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Pokemon, the complex lore, the anti-heroes, even the anime. Yeah, that anime, where Ash is still 10 years old after 20 years. But with the advancement of Pokemon Go, all of that complexity has been thrown out the door. And this brings me to the first way our problem pans out. Too often, we suppress our identities just for the sake of blending in. It's why 62% of Americans have political views that they're afraid to share, fearing that they'll be excluded from their party. It's why 17,300 politicians in Brazil, although multi-ethnic, associated with the majority race instead of the minority. According to them, just to feel a sense of belonging. I mean, they minimize their identity just to fit in. Somehow, we value being included more than being ourselves. And at the end of the day, that doesn't bring us together. It isolates us. Take the story of Manuel Munoz, a Spanish immigrant facing the struggles of assimilation. He describes how the names of his friends and family became more and more anglicized to try to fit in. In an article for the New York Times, he writes that English was for public display and Spanish was for privacy. And privacy quickly turned to shame. When we try to fit in, no matter what, we sandpaper ourselves down into someone else entirely. Now, in Pokemon, every player has to face evil teams who generally have the same goal: take over the world, summon a large, powerful Pokemon to take over the world, or destroy the universe and recreate it to take over the world. And obviously, the protagonist never joins the evil team. But that's not the case in our world. My second concern is that we join dangerous groups to satisfy our desire for belonging. And this compulsion for community can best be seen through the experiences of American immigrants. In the late 1980s, the parents of Rainer Flores came to the United States as illegal immigrants, leaving their son behind in Mexico. But when Rainer moved to the US 15 years later, he found his parents to be near strangers. So to fill that void, he joined the dangerous gang known as MS-13. MS-13 offered Flores membership in a kind of tribe. It was his family. It provided Spanish-speaking friends a sense of belonging, even a new name. When Rainer felt that he didn't belong anywhere, he joined a hate group just to belong somewhere. And this mindset spreads not just to hate groups, but hate itself. Social scientist Arthur Brooks describes how people find a sense of community in the polarized tribes forming on the left and right in America. This is the story of Robert Bowers, a man who found a sense of community with the online chat rooms of Gab.com, a right-leaning website where he frequently posted anti-Semitic slogans and memes. But rather than resistance, he received reassurance, emboldening him to go to a nearby synagogue and murder 11 Jewish people. When our desire to belong destroys our sense of humanity, starts dictating our decisions, started dictating my family. In 2007, my parents came from India to the United States. On their passports, my dad's name was Venkateshwaran Suryanarayanan. My mom's was Srimati Vijayaraghavan. Pretty short names, right? But they quickly realized that their coworkers, American friends, and employers couldn't pronounce their names at all. In fact, they constantly butchered it. So they changed it a lot. Venkateshwaran became Venki. Srimati became Shri. My dad tells me that he changed his name because he didn't want to feel left out. And in that moment, I could see his inner conflict. On one hand was his identity, the name he was born with, his heritage and culture. On the other, simply wanting to belong in America. My father left out part of his identity just to not feel left out by his peers. And my parents are not alone. In fact, 77% of American immigrants dropped their names within 1 year of entering the United States. When we oversimplify our identities, when we suppress our beliefs, when we disregard our morality just for the sake of belonging, we don't just lose a sense of our humanity, we lose a sense of who we are. And I think it's high time we found ourselves again. First, we must have more genuine and authentic experiences of community that are not mediated through technology. Psychologist Jeffrey Pickens writes that feelings of belonging bind us together. Let's use technology to optimize communication, yet not lose our personal human connections to an encroaching digital landscape. And while it may be hard after 2 years of being virtual, let's start meeting each other in real life in a safe way. Go say hi to your neighbors or reunite with pre COVID friends. And most importantly, it means to stop playing Pokemon Go. I know, I'm really sad about it too. But instead of playing Pokemon Go, let's go meet new people and actually talk to them. Next, in our own lives, we should be able to express our opinion, even that means disagreeing with our groups. In her book, Braving the Wilderness, Professor Brene Brown writes that when a group doesn't tolerate disagreement, it forgoes any connection. There is no true belonging. So let's start recognizing when the groups we're in become exclusionary and start making them more inclusive. What does that look like? It means interacting with someone at work whom you've never talked to before. It means hanging out with everyone in your club instead of the friends you already know. It means simply sharing your opinion. And if that sounds difficult, you can start by expressing your love of science fiction or why pineapple on pizza is morally disgusting. And finally, it's time to roll the end credits. While Pokemon Go might be a fun game, let's start living in the real world. Let's look each other in the eyes and develop human connections. And maybe one day we will truly belong.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for judging.
Yeah, I see the comments from the second speaker on the chat. No problem at all. If you want to go now, I am fine. I hope other judges are also fine with that.
Okay, if the competitors are fine with that too.
Yeah. Uh, is that fine if the second speaker goes now? Competitors, I'm asking you.
Yeah, she can go.
Okay.
Yep, that's fine.
I'm fine with it.
Okay, thank you. I can go whenever everyone's ready for me to start.
Yep, I'm ready.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Yes, I'm ready for you.
Okay, thank you. Before entering high school, the stage of life where teenagers get drunk and screw up to prepare for the next stage of life where they experiment with even more alcohol and make permanent mistakes, I used to think that life in high school was that of Sharpay Evans. And most importantly, I really just wanted her locker, full of outfits not only to change into whenever I wanted, but to change into whoever I wanted to be. And in a world so revolutionized by increased media consumption and technological advancements, it has become as easy as snapping our fingers to change something we view as inadequate. If your daily schedule becomes inconvenient, it only takes a few seconds to make a change to a Google document. If your boyfriend is cheating on you, kick him out and download Tinder for a new chance at love. And if you're a government official whose political ideologies misalign with the scientific research being spread, it only takes a few minutes to discredit biomedical research to millions of people around the world. And when we as individuals encounter those with opinions different to ours, we instinctively attempt to alter their thought process and opinions by any means necessary. Yet this can take a very dark turn very quickly. So, when the person Sharpay viewed as threatening to her lifelong goals of being a theater icon and Troy Bolton's future wifey entered her life, it was her immediate instinct to convince Gabriela Montez to stay away. By lying to Gabriela about Troy's true intentions and forcing her to question and eventually despise her place as a new student at East High School, Sharpay accomplished what psychology today defines as an insidious form of manipulation and psychological control, where victims are deliberately and systematically fed false information that leads them to question what they know to be true, often about themselves. And as heinous as it sounds, it's something many people we know do every single day. So today, I will guide you through the maze that is gaslighting, as we first account for its vast spread. Next, we will look through the fog to determine the extent to which gaslighting plays a direct role in our lives and our society, before finally presenting a solution that directly challenges this most subtle form of psychological manipulation. Growing up, I loved watching Disney princess movies, and one of my favorites of the films, Tangled, the film's opening song was Mother Knows Best. After being hidden away in a tower for 18 years, Rapunzel repeatedly asked Mother Gothel to show her the world for just one night. In return, Mother Gothel sang an account of dangers that would overtake Rapunzel should she leave the tower, repeatedly stating, "Mother knows best." Although Mother Gothel is the ultimate example of an individual preying on another's vulnerability due to their lack of knowledge, her behavior represents the often subtle gaslighting present in many relationships between an adult and a child. While growing up, it could have been the frequent guilt tripping when you got into an argument with a relative, or the mother knows best when your interests didn't quite align to that of your parents. Yet, as good therapy states, this early form of gaslighting inhibits the target's self-esteem and causes them to second-guess their own thoughts, a habit that they may carry with them throughout life. And it is no surprise that this form of psychological manipulation is more prevalent than ever in the extensive network of misinformation and public scandal that we refer to as American politics. And by scandal, I do not mean when Bernard Sanders showed up to the inaugural address in mittens and a beanie, which was iconic, by the way. As proclaimed by Farah Latif, a communications expert from George Washington University, political gaslighting utilizes deceptive and manipulative use of information with the motivation to destabilize and disorient public opinion on political issues. And American politics only provides one of the largest platforms in the world with the most controversial topics, so politicians and citizens may gaslight whomever's opinion contradicts their own. So, when US representatives lie about the influx in greenhouse gas emissions or mock Parkland school shooting survivors for begging for gun safety laws, when a poll reveals that 50% of Trump supporters in 2018 claim women who complain about rape cause more problems than they solve, or that 62% of Americans claim they're afraid to share their political views, one of the most disheartening truths of this phenomenon is eliminated. That in a post-pandemic, ever-increasingly politically correct world where people are scrambling to re-establish senses of right and wrong, to reclaim a sense of normalcy, the rules are being changed and reality itself is being questioned now intensely more than ever. And unexpectedly, people are taking advantage of this situation and resorting to any means necessary, specifically gaslighting and misinformation, to essentially force others to conform to the reality that they have now grown comfortable with for themselves. So, earlier this year, after I had spent at least 2 hours pampering myself for the homecoming dance at my high school, a boy I barely knew came up to me unsolicited and told me I was dirty, just like my skin color. Bad, right? Yet in the months following, it wasn't his racist remark that haunted me, but rather my former best friend's response to the situation when I chose to confide in her. She said that I needed to learn how to take a joke, that I take things too seriously. And like countless of my fellow Black girls, we have been repeatedly told more times than reason that we overreact, a well-known stereotype that I usually chose to ignore. Yet after hearing it from someone I had allowed into my life in nearly every capacity, I truly began to believe it, thus momentarily changing my perception of the quite obviously racist comment that the boy had made. As 90% of practitioners agree, psychological violence is usually interspersed with warmth and kindness to create emotional confusion. Thus, we are most likely to be gaslighted by those we are close to. And that's why it's so damaging. Because for me, it took me weeks to finally confront this situation. And for others, it may take years. According to the Domestic Violence Hotline, it takes people 7 times on average to leave an abusive partner. Because as the partner senses that they're losing the individual, they continue to use aggressive forms of gaslighting, emotional manipulation, and or physical abuse to get their partner to stay. So, the big problem with gaslighting is that it targets those who attempt to challenge a system or voice a concern that another may not agree with. So to all the future scientists, politicians, survivors, activists, and pacifists, they may never come to see the light because the contradictions they champion and the different world they present will be ripped from their vision by those who are afraid. Because by rejecting an idea before you can truly understand it, you develop a fear for it. A fear with which you may actually act on. Yet fear may not be permitted to control the route of our lives, of our futures, any longer. So I present to you a panacea, a solution to this predicament, a pandemic in itself. And to that I say, become comfortable with being uncomfortable. This does not mean you should start accepting everything you see or hear. Rather, it is a suggestion to simply consider the opinions and values of others, to open your eyes to the possibilities, to open your eyes when your 17-year-old daughter says she wants to apply to college for a major you may view as inadequate, to open your eyes when your friend chooses to cast a vote for a certain bill or a candidate from a certain different political party, because maybe they offer them hope for the future. To open your eyes when survivors sum up the courage to tell their stories rather than casting blame at them simply because they reveal the truth of a world that is sometimes so broken and forgetful of those it has left behind. Because whether or not you are ready to acknowledge that world, people are already being impacted by it. And when those people fight for a world they believe in or simply for the choice to do so, no one has the right to not only crush them, but attempt to change them through one of the most sinister forms of psychological manipulation permeating the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker number 5, are you ready?
Hi, yes, can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you.
Okay.
I'm ready on my side. Let's wait for signal from other 2 judges, please.
Mhm.
Judges, can she start now or we need to wait?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I will start now. A few years ago, I got into an argument with my father about school. Filled with rage, I threw some green beans at him. Yes, you heard that right. The silence that followed was deafening as both of my parents stared at me wide-eyed. Amidst the lecturing that followed, I yelled, "This is your fault! You started it!" I said that he was annoying and that he was provoking me to throw those green beans. I threw every excuse a kid could think of to plead not guilty in a situation where they are clearly guilty. Ultimately, this is just a frivolous story, and my dad is smart enough to call me out when I'm being a brat. But the need to be the victim extends further than just green beans and arguments with parents. The problem is we as individuals have a tendency to self-victimize ourselves, especially when we are in a place of power, and when we're clearly not the victims in the situation. Through this mindset, we become apathetic to the world around us, instead focusing on ourselves and our own problems. So first, we'll discuss the effects playing the victim can bring. Then, we'll unpack the reasons why playing the victim is so appealing. And finally, lay out some solutions. When our first reaction is deny involvement and try to be the victim, we can distract from the root of the issue. Patrick Riley is the boss of a company called the Global Acceleration Network. One day, there was a mistake on payroll and one of his employees' paychecks went missing. Instead of promptly fixing the issue, Riley started to spiral. I shouldn't have to deal with this, he thought to himself. This is someone else's job. I've got too much going on and I'm overwhelmed. Instead of thinking about the needs of his employee, Riley started to immediately pity himself and was frustrated by everyone else. He reflected on this later, saying, "I felt so sorry for myself. I was only thinking about my needs and how they are affected." In other words, I was playing the victim. Though seemingly mundane, Riley's story is not uncommon. Problems that aren't really about us become centered around ourselves and our minds. This causes us to be frustrated with others and forget that someone else was the real victim here. But this problem often transcends small interpersonal relationships to play out on a much larger scale. When the self-victim mentality crosses paths with systemic oppression, we often play the victim in much more insidious ways. A 2017 poll released by NPR reveals that more than half of the whites surveyed, 55%, said that they believe there's still discrimination against white people in the US today. To illustrate, when questioned after losing his job, 68-year-old Tim Hirschman of Akron, Ohio, said that he believed white people are less likely to get hired than black people. However, the reality is, Hirschman is simply wrong. In 2019, the unemployment rate for African Americans was 5.2%. while it was only 2.9% for white people. So when we self-victimize on a racial level, we take the attention away from marginalized communities. We decrease our empathy and are less likely to advocate for change or acknowledge our privilege because we are stuck in a mindset that only we are suffering. However, this problem doesn't always have to be so serious, and it can still have weight on our interpersonal relationships. I'm sure many of us know that one guy who claims all 10 of his ex-girlfriends are absolutely crazy. Or that friend who bemoans that drama just follows her everywhere. But this attitude creates an us against the world scenario. Essentially, it's a defense mechanism. I can't be the one who caused the breakups because there can't be anything wrong with me. And to be honest, if you really have that many exes that are crazy, maybe it's time to just take a break from dating for a bit. These examples, both serious and lighthearted, illustrate the dangers of playing the victim. We fail to address the underlying causes that leads to our supposed victimization. And we hinder meaningful change for those who are actually being victimized. But the need to become the victim doesn't just appear out of nowhere. There are often two causes in regards to the victim mentality. One, it gives us attention and sympathy, and two, it helps us absolve ourselves of guilt. Playing the victim can often create advantages such as care and affection. So when we put our distress on display, people are more likely to focus on us. To put it simply, think of a child throwing a tantrum. Manfred F.R. Kest-de-Vries, a Dutch professor of leadership development, puts it best when he explains that we obtain secondary gains when we don't overcome a problem. These are, as Vries puts it, the external and incidental advantages derived from a victim's misery. Basically, if I act miserable, I get all the flowers and get well soon cards. But where does this leave the true victims? Furthermore, the victim mentality is often instinctual and used in order to absolve oneself of responsibility and guilt. And of course, I am no stranger to self-victimization. This year, I completely slacked on studying for finals. Like, really badly. To the point where I began studying at 8 p.m. the night before each test. I'll just continue in the morning, I thought to myself. I did not do that. And while that might not sound so bad for some people, I mean, we've all crammed in our lives, and I didn't fail anything. But the problem isn't necessarily my cramming. It's the fact that every time my parents told me that I need to manage my time wisely, I went on a spiel about how no, it was because my teachers assigned too many tests last week, and the SAT just happened, and I had to stay at school very late the week before. And while all those things happened, doesn't change the fact that I simply didn't manage my time well. But to avoid admitting my faults, it was easier to blame my school schedule. Additionally, according to Dr. Brian Lurie, a Stanford professor of organizational behavior, in a context that explains our outcomes as a function of deservingness, it challenges our sense of self to believe that we might have benefited from unearned advantages. Knowing that we have power over others, power that we didn't necessarily ask for, can be uncomfortable. I, for one, feel guilty knowing that I attend a fortunate school while others are not getting the education they deserve. But our desire to distance ourselves from the power we hold is dangerous as well. We like to associate ourselves with the victims because being the perpetrators is simply too uncomfortable. I remember needing to appear to be the victim after the unfortunate green bean incident. I pushed the fault onto my dad because knowing that I truly made a mistake was something I didn't want to face. But just like how children grow to learn that throwing green beans and then saying it wasn't their fault is incorrect, there are ways to distance ourselves from the victim mentality, and not from our faults. Instead of victimizing ourselves from having power, we can channel that feeling into gratitude. An achievable way is to start a gratitude journal. And before you stare at me blankly, hear me out. Gratitude journaling has shown to result in a 5% to 15% increase in optimism, according to Amit Aman in his book, The Happier Human, The Happiness Report. This means that the more we think about what we are grateful for, the more we're able to find things to be grateful for. Another benefit to both ourselves and others, gratitude can decrease our self-centeredness. As a result, we lower the risk of feeling like the world is against us. Instead of pushing aside the feeling of uncomfortableness, embrace it and critically reflect on the positives of our lives. But this is not the only solution. It is simply a tangible one. While gratitude allows us to not forget the positives we have in our lives, we have to create a deeper level of change and alter our mindset altogether. If we think back to Patrick Riley, After finding out that he had a tendency to self-victimize, Riley made an effort to change the way he thought about situations. He explains that when I take a step back and give myself a chance to view the issue with a bit of a distance, it allows me to ask deeper questions. I get to see whether or not this problem is actually reflective of a much deeper issue. So when I look for the root cause, I get to address what's causing the problem in the first place, meaning I can help to keep it from happening again. Like Riley, we should take a step back and search for the root causes of our need to be the victim. We have to ask ourselves, what are we running away from? We need to consider whether it's worth ruining our interpersonal relationships. We need to stop being victims when there is so much to be grateful for. So the next time we think about throwing those green beans or any assortment of objects, we should take a deep breath, put the green beans down, and admit that we might not be the victims here. And when we continue to admit that we're the victim when we're not, we should reconsider who really has the power in the situation. By pushing aside all of our faults, we also push aside the real problems. So when someone in power focuses only on their own grievances, those who truly are the victims become overshadowed. And while playing the victim might give us short-term affection and relief, in the long run, relationships we care about may break apart. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, we continue to reinforce discrimination against marginalized communities. And now, I've got to go apologize to my parents regarding the various times I refused to accept that I was wrong. And maybe this time, no vegetables will be thrown. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we got your topic. I'm fine.
Okay, so are all the judges ready?
Yes, from my side.
Yeah, I'm ready.
I'm ready. You can start whenever you're ready.
All right, sounds good. After every cross-country race, we go around in a circle, taking turns giving compliments to one another. Boring. So today, I wanted to start off by trying just the opposite. So, a thought crossed your mind? That must have been an empty and lonely journey. Whenever I see your outfit, there's not a thing that I would change, except the direction I'm walking in. When you were born, the doctor threw you out the window. And my personal favorite, I love what you've done with your hair. How do you get it to come out your nostrils like that? Of course, I'm joking. I'm sure we all remember our friends making these clever one-liners in a lighthearted manner. But there's a fine line between what is acceptable for these jokes and what isn't, what's problematic and what can simply be brushed aside. However, as our times change, it seems this border becomes more and more arbitrary. For in 2022, our words hold immense weight. More importantly, this blurring of the line between what's problematic and what isn't extends far beyond our speech to even global issues that plague our society. Whether it be on the media or voiced by our politicians, it seems the problems we choose to focus on or ignore have become mistakenly assigned, without a clear divide. Because in an era sculpted by flashy headlines, showbiz, and sensation, it has become easy to lose sight of the not so flashy, not so gravitating issues that destroy our society. And that's my concern. That in a world of distraction, we have become ignorant to important problems that harm us, in replace of shallow concerns that divide us. We have become puppets, being played by a complex mix of dramatization and fancy rhetoric that, as world-renowned sociologist Joseph R. Gusfield explains, plays on the fiction and drama of public consciousness. So today, Let's clarify the divide by first exploring how and next why problems become problems, before finally drawing the line with some not so problematic solutions. Now, just the other day, when I was scrolling through my newsfeed on my trusty source of Instagram, I found story after story that captivated my attention. Last year, Avenger Scarlett Johansson took on her most difficult adversary, Disney, seeking to create a few more widows by lawsuiting the authority. In May this year, the gates closed on the marriage of the richest man in the world, with the ex-Microsoft co-founder divorcing his wife of over 27 years. The bill for the lawyers must have been high. And Elon Musk finally answered the question, who let the dogs out, when Dogecoin rose to over 42 billion net worth. Now, more likely than not, you've heard at least one of these issues. I mean, it's not every day events like these take place. And maybe that's just it. These events were out of the ordinary. And our attention, defined by clicks and likes, are drawn not to pertinent, important, and lasting issues, but to these illegitimate sound bites and text we see on our screens. As Johns Hopkins editor and writer Dale Kiger explains, we are paying attention to distraction. This is called sensationalism. The idea that our media has begun to push an agenda of shocking and exciting stories at the expense of importance, accuracy, and urgency. As Rohan Upadhyay, media and telecommunications analyst from Vanderbilt University, explains, the truth is, medias don't have a liberal bias or a conservative bias. They have a viewership bias. News medias have one goal: to be addictive. Public events now tug at our heartstrings, using fancy rhetoric to tailor issues to the public concern. We have been stitched and fit to be fed the troubles of our time, the flashy headlines, the t-shirt slogan worthy, the out of the ordinary. We think we know so much, but in the words of author and philosopher Daniel de Nicola, we live in a culture of ignorance. William Shakespeare once wrote, "We have eyes without feeling, feeling without sight, ears without hands or eyes." What he meant was that we lack perception, and we lack action. We are complicit as the media paints a picture of what we should and shouldn't care about. That we should care about the Afghan conflict only after a terrorist group has taken complete control, when for decades systematic oppression had been terrorizing the region. Because that was ordinary. That we should care about global pandemics only after COVID-19 has killed 4.5 million individuals, when our experts have been warning us for decades about this inevitable event. Because warnings aren't getting worse. That we should put our attention on the rich and the famous, when our seniors have been ignored with the highest suicide rates of any age group. Because that doesn't affect us. And that we should warn our loved ones to stay safe from Black Lives Matter protests, when in reality, more than 95% are peaceful. Because riots are more click-worthy. Like a deer drawn to headlights, we are drawn to headlines. Now, in my household, my parents make sure I talk to my grandparents on the phone at least every other day. And me, being the rebellious teen that I am, see it often as a chore, for my grandparents will go on and on and on. But one day, my grandma told me we had to cut it short. Wait. Yes, Grandma? 我是要走了. So early? What for? 哎呀，没有什么. My grandma, living across the globe in China, told me we had to cut it short for reasons that weren't important. And she was right. They weren't just important. They were life-threatening. She had gone to the hospital, diagnosed with stage 3 of dementia. I was afraid. afraid for her health, afraid that I couldn't see her soon, afraid that she wouldn't remember me. And yet society was focused on Twitter bans, space race lawsuits, and celebrity drama over helping a disease that tortures 55 million people worldwide, like my loving grandmother. I had to tell myself it was ordinary for the elderly to get dementia, that it was ordinary for our loved ones to mentally deteriorate, losing control over their own body, and that it was ordinary for my grandma to lose her memory and forget who I was. This is a problem we can alleviate, but frankly, society doesn't care. We spend 250 times more money on warfare than welfare. Our seniors have been dubbed the forgotten generation. And although this problem is getting worse, it's not a headline we would click on. It's time we draw the line. Our entire lives, we have been told what's important about a day, what's worth mentioning. We have been fed the conclusions rather than arriving to them ourselves. And the media uses the flashiest headlines to bait the hook. In the process, we lose sight of what's important and what isn't, allowing others to decide for us. This is no ordinary problem and requires no ordinary solution. My grandma fights her dementia not with a groundbreaking discovery. She fights it by making her bed, by talking to me. As Admiral William H. McRaven tells us, if you want to change the world, start off by making your bed. Let's learn to appreciate the everyday and seemingly insignificant events in our lives. Build a skepticism towards big headlines as being the big deal they may not be. Instead, let's make small accomplishments headlines, everyday grievances headlines, and become unstuck in the headlights. Only then can we truly begin to execute some extraordinary solutions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker, are you ready?
Yes, I believe that's me,
Yeah.
Stanton Nowinski.
Yeah.
And you would like my title in the chat, correct?
Yes, please.
I think you are given a mentioned that in the speak. In
Oh,
the
I
chat.
have.
Yeah. This just isn't justice. Yeah. We have.
Is it all right if I time myself in addition to you guys timing me?
Yeah, you time yourself. Yes.
Okay.
From my side, you are good to go. Let's wait for signal from other judges.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, I'm ready too.
All right. You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Bold words for a dude dressed up in a bat costume. You know, as a kid, Batman was always my favorite superhero. Something about enacting justice on bad guys really appealed to my 9-year-old sense of morality. Criminals got what they deserved. Retribution. But as I grew older, I realized that Batman's brand of justice wasn't really justice at all. To begin with, his villains are mentally ill patients of Arkham Asylum. And even if we assumed that Batman's bad guys were getting what they deserved, one broken femur at a time. Did it help the community? Was building a car that could shoot rockets truly more important than investing in welfare programs for Gotham's poor? And that brings me to today's topic. We're too invested in the idea that people get what they deserve, also known as the just world fallacy, like Batman's justice. It's understandable that we would want the world to be just. David McRaney, an international best-selling author, explains that it feels better to believe in karmic justice, to believe in fairness and reward. And on a small scale, it's fine. With phrases like, what goes around comes around, or that's karma for you. But it becomes a problem when we begin to believe unconditionally that good things happen to good people, while bad things happen to bad people. So today, let's first inspect the crime scene of the just world fallacy. Then we'll gather evidence on the damage it's done, and finally, we'll seek out true justice. First, the idea that people get what they deserve assumes that good things come to good people, but that's not always true. Take, for example, SAT scores. SATs are supposed to be the best possible measure of a high school student's capabilities. The better the student, the better the score, right? But while it's absolutely true that students who work hard do better on SATs, SATs aren't really fair or just. According to NBC in 2019, students from families making more than $200,000 a year scored 30% better on their SATs than students from families making less than $20,000. And unless we believe legitimately that poor students just aren't as smart as wealthy students, it's clear that there are plenty of good students not getting good scores. A similar narrative surrounds income inequality in America. America is supposed to be a land of opportunity, a free market, fair game. But while once again it's true that working diligently will give you a better chance at economic success, the American dream is still largely inaccessible to millions. Peter Tennant, an economist at MIT, explains that for the average American to escape from poverty, they must work for 20 years without financial crisis or accident. To do so, they must navigate a biased education system, poorer job opportunities, and even subpar standards of living. And once they've accomplished all of this, all it takes is a slight mistake to erase all of their progress. What's worse, a study by Aaron Godfrey, an NYU professor of psychology, found that telling poor people the world was fair had a negative effect long-term on their self-esteem. Why? Because when we set up good people for failure and tell them it's fair, they begin to think that they themselves are the problem. In addition, the just world fallacy contributes to a venomous idea that bad things happen to bad people. Consider the opioid crisis in America. For years, the American public has been told that drug addiction is a choice. Ronald Reagan, a pioneer of the war on drugs, called drugs a temptation. And 35 years later, we're still throwing drug addicts in jail for supposed poor choices, presenting a narrative that drug addicts deserve to be punished. But drug addiction often isn't even a choice. Opioid addicts in particular were set up to fail. According to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, doctors and hospitals have been overprescribing opioids for decades to make more of a profit. And the result? 80% of those addicted to heroin started with prescription opioids. Talk about a gateway drug. Drug addicts aren't bad people, and they don't deserve to be punished. But by promoting that narrative, companies can continue to make a profit off of a national crisis. Finally, the idea that bad things happen to bad people has been used to justify police brutality and decrease sympathy for victims of police violence. Our criminal justice system centers on a narrative of individual responsibility, essentially telling us criminals invite worse treatment. If this sounds abstract, you've heard it before. You want to stay safe? Don't break the law. Follow instructions and comply with the police. And thus the idea is planted that if you're a good citizen, you'll receive nice treatment from the police. And the opposite, if you're a criminal, then it's perfectly acceptable to strip you of your basic human rights. The justification for Breonna Taylor's brutal murder, her boyfriend had a minor criminal history, didn't comply with officers who shot him and Taylor through their closed front door. And for George Floyd, much of the same. A fake $20 bill, another minor criminal history, and drug addiction. Police perception of an individual can dictate whether a person of color deserves to live or die, based solely on whether the police see them as good or as a criminal, a threat, and someone not deserving of equal protection under the law. And thus, we turn victims into villains. I've experienced the cost of this type of thinking firsthand. My uncle, who works as a university professor, was diagnosed with cancer, leukemia, in 2015. After months of grueling treatment, unable to work, barely able to eat, his boss concluded that because he could no longer provide full-time benefit to the university, that he deserved to be moved to part-time status. It didn't matter to her that moving my uncle to part-time because of his cancer would be straight up illegal. It didn't matter to her that he was vulnerable and that he was helpless. And it didn't matter to her, most importantly, that it would eliminate the healthcare benefits paying for his ongoing care. Why? Did he deserve this? She thought, indirectly or directly, that somehow he was to blame. To me, my uncle will always be a superhero. He's earned his titles: doting father, phenomenal professor, fun uncle. He never asked for cancer survivor. It's so important that we think about what it means to be deserving when there are 3 million Americans without health care every single year, when there are 24 million unemployed Americans, and when there are 11 million American children living in poverty. Because no matter who these people are or what they do, the only thing they'll ever deserve is our help. So we've learned that the just world fallacy, well, just doesn't work. But what steps can you and I take as individuals to change the way we think about justice in our society? First, we must stop thinking about people quickly as good or bad. Award-winning behavioral scientist Daniel Kahneman explains that when we shift our judgments of others from quick emotional responses to long extended analyses, we often retract our sharp judgments of others. Because we realize that with a few exceptions, no one's inherently a bad person. And that's key to stopping the just world fallacy. Secondly, and more concretely, we must extend our empathy for others. When we empathize with people we consider to be incompetent or bad, we stop wishing bad things on them. A study by Duke University showed a videotape of a woman being electrocuted based on her responses to a learning task. Those told to watch the video and imagine themselves in the woman's shoes were substantially more likely to say she didn't deserve it than those simply told to watch the video. And I know it's going to be very, very hard for us to empathize with bad people. But try talking to a member of the opposite political party about their honest beliefs. Try empathizing with her people no matter the situation. To me, being a hero is no longer about capes or caves or karmic justice. It's about knowing there's good in people, even when you can't see it right away. And that, I think, is truly just. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And our last speaker, Alex, are you ready?
I just wanted to confirm, can you see and hear me well from here?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Tell me when everyone's ready.
Can you give us your title?
Oh, sure thing. Do you want me to tell it to you or should I put it in the chat?
Chat.
Great.
Yeah, I'm ready.
I'm
Yeah.
ready.
Awesome. Over the years, I've started noticing that Americans are not that popular. We get made fun of a lot. And to be fair, some of it is warranted. We do remember the fallen of the Revolutionary War by seeing who can thrust the most hot dogs down their throats. And our geography knowledge is lackluster to say the least. I'm pretty sure most of us believe there's America, Canada, somewhere over there is Westeros. But there is one thing we do get right: freedom. We love our independence. And what's not to love? I mean, free press, free speech, free refills? From our universal mistrust of anything offered by the government to the dozens of oratories urging you to do your own thing. Our pop culture and policies worship autonomy, and it's nothing new. Independence has been the cornerstone of our identity for centuries. And though it's made us into the country we are today, I worry that what was once a healthy respect for self-reliance is frankly now a mania. Harvard University fellow Renee Loth explains that we've taken the cult of independence too far. Radical autonomy has turned America into a country with less pluribus and more unum, with fewer bridges and more ramparts. So today, let's examine the implications of our obsession with independence. First personal, then societal, before finally finding some freeing solutions. Now, one of the most frightening examples of this fixation on independence occurred about 3 months ago, when my school attempted to ban phones. Now, among other things, this would have forced students to actually ask for help like human beings, instead of surreptitiously Googling the answer like usual. We, the students, calmly and agreeably said, "Over our dead bodies." The war rages still, but one thing is certain: infringements on our fragile senses of self-reliance will not be tolerated. In our society, being able to handle everything yourself demonstrates character, and needing support will come. For example, whenever anyone asks you how you're doing, I'm willing to bet you respond with, "I'm fine," even when you aren't. Author Mark Green explains that we privilege self-reliance and emotional toughness over honest expression. And we don't just stifle ourselves, but entire segments of our society as well. From kindergarten to college, we tell our boys that they need to start winning their own battles. We order them to man up because emotional vulnerability won't cut it in the real world. And as the Good Men Project notes, we're so busy ensuring stoic independence in our little sons that we're raising generation after generation of men who can't create community. In a country obsessed with creating strong men, somehow they're never taught the courage it takes to ask for help. And this isn't abstract. 75% of people with mental illnesses refuse to seek assistance because of the shame of not being able to handle their problems on their own. We think we're preserving our precious independence, when all we're really doing is sacrificing the connections that make us human. We've all felt the effects of this delusion in some way or another in our personal lives. But when it seeps into our policies, then it's no longer just destructive. In many cases, it's outright deadly. The New York Times reports that in 2021, there were 22 mass shootings in the United States, making it one of the most violent years on record. Yet, with regards to gun control, like usual, we refuse to do anything. After the Port Arthur and Cumbria massacres, both Britain and Australia passed sweeping gun restrictions. Yet we simply can't bring ourselves to make progress. How could we? When sociology professor Gary Young notes that in a society that fetishizes self-reliance, the gun speaks to the sacred ideal that each person should be responsible for defending themselves. The real American doesn't wait around for a police car that might arrive too late. The real American doesn't need other people to protect their family and home. It's a powerful image, but one that ignores the inconvenient fact that of those 22 mass shootings, not a single one was stopped by a real American. This infatuation with independence profoundly warps our judgment. We're so caught up in trying to do everything ourselves that we don't realize we're not able to do everything ourselves. But anyone who admits that and gets help is shamed. Like in 2014, when then House Speaker Paul Ryan said that everyone who depends on food stamps hasn't learned the value of hard work. And that has real-world consequences. People like single mother Emily Withnell and thousands more make sure that no one is waiting behind them in line at the grocery store so that no one can see them use their government-issued tokens to pay. And we don't just criticize independence, we loathe it. Because woven into the fiber of America is the message that if you're not independent, then what are you worth? Our fixation is as insidious as it is dangerous. And I know that very well. For most of my life, I've had pretty severe anxiety. Anxiety is really good at blocking you off. It makes you oblivious to other people. You think of social connection as more of a quota and less of an emotional need. I didn't think I needed other people. And I lost so much genuine connection because of it. It didn't help that this was the beginning of the homework black hole known as junior year either. I would come home from school, do my homework, go to bed. The longest I talked to my parents each day was in the 10-minute car ride home. Then one day my dad sat down to have dinner with me. And I remember really laughing for the first time in a long time. I never realized before I had that conversation with my dad how badly I relied on other people. I firmly believe that our ability to need others is our greatest strength. So while the world might like to make fun of Americans, there's one thing no one can deny: our unfailing potential to change for the better. So let's change. First, we can restore our interdependence, create connections with one another. Renee Loth reminds us that we need some more humility, acknowledging how much we rely on other people to build our roads, teach our children, and heal our wounds. So the next time someone asks you how you're doing, confide in them. Maybe they'll confide in you. Make a point of having a 20-minute conversation with your family every day. Clinical psychologist Amy Smith notes that relational bonds are made stronger by reciprocating actual acts of support. So we're the freest when we celebrate our dependencies, or isolated when we minimize them. Second, we need to destigmatize societal dependence. Receiving government aid or getting help for a mental illness is not a point of shame. We simply have no right to judge. And though we might like to pretend we're completely self-reliant, we're not. And that's okay. When we finally accept each other for who we are, unite to lead and to listen, to bend but not to break, we'll finally realize that this country needs each and every one of us. Together. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have completed all the contestants. We are good to stop this session.
Yes.
Thank you for judging. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for judging.